The Middle East has been on a lot of people's minds with good reason, and there are many, many important conversations around peace in the Middle East. Today, we are focusing specifically on one of these many problems, weapons of mass destruction. IPB, of course, we have many other events addressing other aspects of the conflict, and we welcome you to join us for other events for that. But today, we have a more singular focus that we are so blessed to have with us, three representatives from METO, the Middle East Treaty Organization that has been working now for decades on creating a treaty organization, a weapons of mass destruction free zone in the Middle East. So I will introduce them in the order that they are sitting next to me here. So first we have Sharon Dolev, who is the founder and executive director of the Middle East Treaty Organization and a council member of the International Peace Bureau. She has a long and distinguished career in peace, and I won't go through all of it because that would take probably our entire meeting today. But she is a peace and human rights activist with a focus on eradicating nuclear and other weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East. She focuses on innovative policy, education, advocacy, and activism. And has been a social and political activist for over 35 years at this point. Next, we have Emad Kayai. Emad is the director of METO, also has a long and distinguished career that would take a long time to go through. So I'm just taking a few notes, and please, if I miss any key points, correct me, add to your own biographies here. But Emad works at the intersection of political risk, disarmament, and diplomacy. He's the co-author of the Middle East Weapons of Mass Destruction, A New Approach to Non-Proliferation, published by Routledge. And he works or seeks to eradicate all weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East. Formerly, he was also a researcher for Princeton University's Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs, and an associate at Columbia University Center for International Conflict Resolution. And finally, we have Asma Ghidera. Am I saying that correctly? It's our first time meeting, but very, very nice to have you with us here today. Asma is a catalyst wearing many hats, facilitator, consultant, artist, writer, and designer, a Moroccan-born, French-adopted digital nomad. She worked and lived in over 20 countries before moving to Byron Bay in Bundjalung County. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right either, excuse me, in early 2020. And she is also representing the organization Women's Environment Leadership. So we are very happy to have you all with us today, and I don't want to take too much time for the introduction here, so we're going to go right into it. I've been told that Emad will be our first speaker for today, speaking a little bit of METO's work in the past leading up till today. So Emad, please go ahead.
Well, thank you so much, Sean, IPB, Rosa Luxemburg, for inviting us on this topic of the day. And as we have already mentioned, there's a lot going on in the Middle East. And of course, the war in Gaza is central to the minds of many. In this chaos and in this raging conflicts across the region, in Sudan, in Yemen, the dysfunction in Lebanon, we have a lot of issues happening simultaneously in the region. But on the topic of weapons of mass destruction, free zone in the Middle East, I would like to just set the context of the idea, where it originated, and bring us closer to today and what we want to do in the future. The concept of a weapons of mass destruction free zone in the Middle East, in the simplest form, is a geographical area, in this case the Middle East, that encompasses 22 members of the Arab League, plus Iran and Israel. So that's the geography. And it's about eradicating all weapons of mass destruction. And weapons of mass destruction primarily divides into three areas: nuclear weapons, chemical weapons, and biological weapons. And for each one of these, there's of course a whole set of obligations, treaties that are necessary to make sure that its production, use, stockpile, or even research on such weapons is removed from the calculations in the region. Of course, we do have some challenges already on that, since Israel is the only nuclear weapon state. Iran has a very advanced nuclear program, and other countries in the region who are seeking to modernize or begin their expansion of their own civilian nuclear programs. So there are many proliferation risks on this specific component of weapons of mass destruction. This concept of eradicating it from the region dates back actually decades ago. It began in 1974 by Iran and Egypt proposing at the United Nations for a nuclear weapons-free zone in the Middle East. However, that had no traction for a long time, simply because Israel in this case was seen as being singled out for its nuclear weapons, and therefore was not at all engaging in any discussions on the issue of disarmament. Fast forward to 1990, and here is a change in the language. Expands to include other weapons of mass destruction, the chemical weapons and biological weapons, by removing one factor or one issue that was keeping this topic from getting anywhere, by saying that, there are chemical weapons programs in Iraq at some point, the use of it in the region, that could be another way for us to then use as leverage to create this zone. Again, there was very little traction on this issue until 1995. In 1995, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty that deals specifically with nuclear weapons proliferation and disarmament, and that is partied by almost all the nations in the world, with the exception of India, Pakistan, North Korea, and Israel. And in this framing of the NPT, there was a bargain for this treaty to be indefinitely extended. And this indefinite extension of the NPT relied on a key promise by all the other member states that had signed this treaty to advance a weapons of mass destruction free zone in the Middle East. This is how they wanted to somehow make some agreement that would create a consensus to extend this treaty that deals with the eradication or disarmament of nuclear weapons. And for that, one primary pillar is the establishment of a WMD-free zone in the Middle East. 1995, fast forward to 2015, and every measure that was taken to bring about some coherent and tangible solution or process to advance the WMD-free zone in the Middle East was non-existent. Numerous attempts at creating even an agenda for the conference that would bring these states together was somehow, some reasons, and we can get to that in a different time, derailed. Then this is where our work starts to really shape up. When we saw the disappointment in the international community under their obligations to advance this, and even within the region, the Arab countries and Iran, Israel, also being an obstacle in moving this process forward, us as civil society, in our own pathways, converged on finding a regional solution that lifts up this issue of a WMD-free zone in the Middle East through a more tangible and technically viable and possible even politically, if there is political will from the actors, to realize a workable solution to advancing and establishing such a zone in the future. And here I will stop. And there are some amazing other milestones that follows. And I wanted to give this context because then you'll see how impactful the next couple of years will look like in terms of the diplomatic, political process that had began all the way down in 1974. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Iman. Everything okay?
It surprised me.
Surprises can sometimes be good.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to not know exactly where he's stopping or continuing. It keeps us.
Maybe just to mention before I go on, that we will have the majority of our session today focused on a question and answer period. So all that are in the audience, either in person here or those online with us, we welcome questions that you'll have. We do ask, of course, to relate them as much as possible to our specific discussion here and not the more general questions of peace in the region, although there is, of course, connection there and as it applies I think our speakers are ready to answer that, but so please do take time to think of questions and now we look forward to having a chance to answer those after we have our presentations. So Sharon, I believe you'll continue on the next few years and beyond.
Let's stop at 2015. Now we're going to.
Okay, so I'll go back. When we talk about the 1995 resolution, sorry, NPT, we need to understand something really important. All the states had to agree on something in consensus, right? All of them had to vote that they called for a nuclear weapon-free zone in the Middle East. Now, it means that by then it was about 197 states, I think, that voted on something that they knew that they can't get, right? Because the only people that are obliged by a treaty are the people that sign on it, like in any contract. If you didn't sign the contract, it doesn't apply on you. Israel never signed the NPT. Israel was never a part of the NPT. So when they made the 95 decision, they made a decision that they can't make, and nobody talked about it for many years. But for many years, every year almost, or every 5 years, 4 times, the NPT states are meeting and still calling for something that they can't get, the 95 resolution, because the one state that can give them what they want is not in the room. So what is the point? How did they dedicate it? Weeks of sending diplomats from 197 states to the UN to continue to talk about something that they can't get. On the other hand, look at the conversation in Israel. In Israel, the whole conversation, and as the campaign grew and as I managed to get to the rooms that at the beginning I didn't have a chance to go, it was kind of mind-blowing to see how the decision makers in Israel, the people, the ex-generals, the all those that sit in the secret think tanks, and they all talk about nuclear Iran.
Say it again, because that sounds like no.
Nuclear Iran, okay? So on one hand, you have the diplomats from 197 states talking about something that they can't achieve. And on the other hand, you have the Israelis and of course the Americans as a follow-up talking about fighting something that doesn't exist, that the only way to prevent it from happening, the only way is by decision. Iran could have built the bomb in the last 40 years, maybe in the last 20 years, for sure. That's why everybody's so afraid of Iran, because it's just a decision. And once they make the decision, they'll have the bomb. So if it's just about a decision, how come those 197 states at the UN and all those experts in Israel and the US, and I guess in Europe as well, don't talk about this scare as if it's solvable in the only way they know, which is an agreement? Okay, and at that point, that wasn't the case. I can tell you that as the Israeli disarmament movement before METO, one of our strongest and actually good campaigns that worked, I forgot to talk about it today in the session of what worked, was the Don't Bomb Talk campaign. You can look it up because we actually managed to get into international media with that. We demonstrated in front of the IDF, in front of the Ministry of not security, defense. We did the weekly vigils and under the house of the Minister of Defense, then in front of the Kiryat, the chief headquarters of the army, and a lot in front of the American embassy in Israel. So the Don't Bomb Talk campaign said, Obama kept saying all options are on the table, but all options were different, like a buffet of threats over Iran. And if the only way to get them not to have a bomb is by agreement, how come an agreement, negotiations, are not on the buffet table? And that was what the campaign focused, add negotiations to the threats buffet, because this is the only thing that might work. And this was a good campaign. This was a campaign that I don't think that this is why they went for negotiations, but inside Israel, it did change a little bit the conversation. At the same time, it was quite obvious that all these generals that by then I know that the Iran deal is good, were afraid to speak. Only now they say, oh, well, maybe we should have kept the deal, okay? But they never had the courage to speak up because they didn't want to sound like traitors. And the point is that they are traitors to Israel. Because this agreement, the Iran deal agreement, was the one thing that is keeping us safe from Iranian bomb. And that one safety that we had, Israel took apart via Trump. And by that put Israel in acute danger. If you believe that Iran might want to wipe Israel, which is the belief inside Israel, then how these two perceptions meet each other. I'll move forward now, quickly, from the 95 resolution and the Iran deal. When we wanted to understand why all these states are calling for something that they don't believe that can happen, we started to do what we call the roundtable process, where we invite people in the same room, usually with internationals. We have to have internationals if we want to have Israelis and Arabs and Iranians around the same table. It has to be with international presence, had to be at least. And to start first mapping the obstacles. So we ask questions that we ask without telling them where we're going for, right? Just to hear what stuck them. And also what are the components that they think are needed. And then we did something very strange. We then stopped talking to anyone. And just alone we thought, okay, now let's imagine, just imagine that all the states that are calling for a nuclear weapon-free zone in the Middle East actually wants it. Just that. And this text that panel after panel of international experts said it was they call it the impossible text, impossible treaty. Well, suddenly we have a draft treaty of something that looks like a solution. It can't be good, right? If all the experts said that it can't work, we just imagine that the states want it and we have a solution that might work. Okay, it's probably very stupid. We missed something. So we asked a friend, international, British, from BASIC, to send this draft treaty around all the ministries in the Middle East. We also sent it to some big shot specialists in the international arena and to the president of the 95 NPT. And they all came with the same answer. That might work. So if from 1974 until 2000 and the beginning of 2016, they thought it was impossible. And the only thing that made it possible was us imagining they actually want what they're called on. Then that was the result of the research. The real research was what is the real obstacle, not in order to write a draft treaty. The draft treaty showed us what we suspected, that they didn't really want it, that they really didn't believe that it's possible, and that the draft treaty is not really something that we need to use in order for them to negotiate, but in order for them to not being able to say anymore that it's impossible. We want it, but it's impossible. And that actually was one of our major breakthroughs, because we took the roundtable, we took the treaty, and then we had the second one and the third one, and we got up to a fifth one. So now we have several models, different models for a WMD prison in the Middle East. They all said it's good, and now we can confront them with that and said, okay, if we have more than one possibility, then one thing has to change. You can't say it's impossible anymore. And if it is possible, where lies your responsibility? You represent states in the Middle East. What is it that you're waiting for? And a few months after that side event, when we presented that, and that is what we're actually telling diplomats in the room, they came up with a UN resolution that is calling for an annual conference on the WMD free zone in the UN headquarters in New York until they'll reach an agreed upon text. Now, they already have most of the text, but they are sitting there year after year, now for 4 years, reaching consensus, which some of you know that it's almost never happens at the UN. reaching consensus. 23 states of the Middle East. Israel is not there, but the one thing that is actually taking place is that the states in the room doing something that they've never done before. They're imagining what would Israel say if Israel is in the room. So what can be a text that Israel will be able to join? So it's not a text in order to, like before, just pointing at Israel and saying Israel should, but if Israel wants to, let's make it possible. And that is like really a shift in diplomacy that came from activism that went to what we can achieve and what we can't achieve. Another thing that we looked at as an obstacle is the way that organizations behave, because there are so many organizations that want this. One of the things that we recognize is that organizational ego is one of the major obstacles. Organizations that start to protect the existence of their own organization, organization that reached a milestone that is a success, and then get married to this milestone and forget that there was a goal out there. And another thing is how organizations don't want to work with each other. So one of the things that we have decided, and we'll keep talking about, am I talking too long?
Yes.
I'll try to act. And one of the things that we realize is that we have to make sure that our organization doesn't have any organizational ego. The one reasons that the Arab states could have taken the draft treaty was we didn't put names on it. I mean, such an amazing work without our names, because it's an open source, and if we put our names, they won't use it. It needs to be theirs, and it's theirs now. It's not our treaty, it's their treaty. Whatever that will come up with it, whether they take the text, don't take the text, it will be the states, not us. We need to realize where our power lies and where it's not. But where our power lies and our responsibility lies is not to get married to the November conference. Yes, we are one of the only organizations in the world that is invited to this room, but that doesn't make it worse for us to go there if we are not ready to work for the next step. And the next step for us is what happens when they reach this text. And when, and we know that they will. And when, and if they would like, I mean, we do have one of us, not here right now, Dr. Leonardo Bandara, who is so much better than us in treaty writing and understanding. Now he's the director of METO that is in charge of the November conference. Well, we're taking it to the next stage. And the next stage is something that we all can do together. This is why we start the conversation here. The next step is that it is, and we can open up the question afterwards, it is important to realize that Israel, just like the other nuclear armed states, is unlikely to disarm if the rest of the nuclear states are not taking steps forward. And this is one thing that we need to start working now, not just because we want Israel in the room, but because it's the right thing to do since 1945. The second thing that we need to realize is that even though politically we had to put peace aside, and diplomatically we had to put peace aside, and if you like, we can talk about it later, why it was important, and to focus only on nuclear, still, without some more trust in the region, it will be very hard to imagine not just Israel coming to the table, but Iran and Saudi Arabia not moving forward with their nuclear plans. And it's not just, and for example, just to understand how distorted this whole discussion is that I don't think that most of even disarmament campaigners around the world are aware to the fact that Saudi is much closer to nuclear weapons than Iran. And nobody's talking about it. Why is nobody's talking about it? Because Israel, for example, can't bomb Saudi Arabia, right? Like we did other reactors. They are friends of the Americans. And the rest of the world doesn't want to talk about it because Saudi Arabia is part of their own coalitions. So the next state that can become nuclear in the Middle East is Saudi Arabia, de facto, on the ground, but we're not talking about it. And this is something that we need to stop to. I mean, we have to start looking at the Middle East without the stories with ourselves, all the stories, and realize that only regional solutions, and we can explain later why, only regional solutions might work. And And that's why we think that for the war in Gaza, for other conflicts between Israel and Palestine, and in the Middle East, only a regional solution that gives safety, recognition, and everything together can work in the Middle East. And this is not something that we actually invented, because the Arab League already suggested that same thing in 2002 with the Arab Peace Initiative, that then the Arab League itself, even though every year they vote for it, they're not pushing it. The Israelis never officially answered it, and the world behaves like it was never offered. But that said, that if we solve just some core issues between Israel and Palestine, all states in the Middle East for end of conflict and normalization. We know now that from 2002, we need to update it now. We need to include Yemen, we need to include Sudan, we need to include Syria, we need to include all the states in the Middle East and bring them together for solution. And if the states in the region will come up with a text, we will already have the beginning of peace work in the Middle East that will allow all of that to work together. Sorry for being long.
Thank you so much, Sharon, and you.
Maybe it should be tougher.
No, you know, I think we have plenty of time here, and I wouldn't have stopped you a second earlier. It's very interesting, and I think especially the final comments you mentioned and around trust and regional solutions are incredibly interesting, and I hope we'll have some questions to follow up more on that later. But I would then like to give the floor over to Asma for further remarks, please.
Thank you, Sean. Hi, everyone. Before I start, I might just also to include, I don't know, the camera is here.
Yeah.
Hello, people online. Just maybe take the temperature of the room here and there, and let us just check how people are feeling. So with a show of hands, if you're feeling good, go like this. If you're feeling like it's the end of the day, I'm very tired and it's hard to focus, let us know. If you're like, I can't deal with it, let us know as well. If you're in the screen, put your camera on. I don't know if anyone's recording. Otherwise, maybe 1, 2 emojis are 1, 2, 3. All right. Yeah.
Somewhere there.
One medium rare.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have some thumbs up online.
Oh, good. Thank you for joining us at the end of the evening and of the week, which is for such a big topic. So, and also thank you for inviting me. I'm a new member to Meto. I met Sharon and Ahmad recently. This is actually also my first hybrid real life event with people online. I either do only online or only offline, so I don't really know where to look, so I'm looking for it. So as you mentioned, I'm a feminist activist, and I worked in the region and all over the world on gender issues. The reason why Sharon invited me and we decided to bring it is because we're talking about a region and dynamics of conflicts and violence that are going on for a long time, and one of the obstacles is not looked enough is gender, and it's a key element of peace. Not only because of the violence that happens during conflict, but also because of the leadership and the relationships that are behind these leaderships and value we have. And we're talking about very. I don't know if you know the UN resolution 1325. I will read it for you. It's a resolution addressing sexual violence in armed conflict and increasing women's participation in peace processes and political institutions. Why is this important? Gender is never touched, even though we're in very patriarchal countries. And if we want to lead the change that Sharon and Ahmad are mentioning, we need to talk about it because it's the structural constitution of our societies. It hasn't always been like this in the region. It's also something that I want to add. Our cultures mostly come from matrilineal cultures, which is different from matriarchal. We're talking about cultures where women are sacred and respected and involved in the decision process. Some of that is still present in our society. So even though women's are excluded in terms of rights and discrimination in many ways. There is also a deep respect, especially if we look at mothers and elders. In Morocco, still today in the Sahara, in some of the Amazigh tribes, women still today, the more they are divorced, the better they're valued, because in the market of society, because it means that they have experience, they know how to run the house, etc., etc. It's colonization and patriarchy that brought, I guess, colonization not only, but it's colonization that I'm also tired, that brought patriarchy to the forefront. And feminism in the Arab world also is different from the white feminism that we know. So in the early 90s, the movement was around both men and women together to dismantle the structures. It was not men versus women. And it's something that we lost today. And feminists like Fatima Mamisi in Morocco wrote a lot about it. In Egypt, during the 1919 revolution, both men and women were active in the demand for liberation of Egypt. But when the political leadership was granted to male, then women were excluded. So the colonization process is a really strong and active part of it. I want to mention some of the movements for peace that Sharon knows, because she was involved with the Women in Black in Israel. Sharon, maybe you want to share a little bit about it, because it's a very good illustration of how the leadership of women coming together for peace can be an inspiration in non-violent direct action.
Yeah. So I think that Women in Black in Israel, one of the nice things about it is that there was no hierarchy. Women organized in their cities, and the decision was to stand in black for 1 hour, calling for the end of the occupation, and to do so while dressed in black and staying silent. So people can curse us, people can beat us, and and it was something about it. I mean, at the top, I think that we had these groups in 23 cities in Israel, and in the major junctions, and it was not, doesn't matter what happens, doesn't matter what the weather is, every Friday from 1 to 2, when everybody finished, then it was like when the Shabbat is entering, so the roads are packed, everybody is doing the last, so the standing quietly was strong. But I can also say that it was the first time that it was done in Israel. And that the thing that was obvious then is that the left-wing men couldn't stand it. It wasn't just the right-wingers that couldn't stand it. It was the men that were feeling first very afraid of it, really. So it was very interesting to see how slowly this movement became something that people do, even men, the quiet standing, the non-violent. It didn't exist in Israel before that, the non-violent direct actions. So, and the four mothers. Some people think that the reason that Israel moved out from Lebanon, was because of the four mothers, a group of women that call themselves the mothers of the soldiers. We are not willing to send our kids to die for this stupid war. And they became a huge movement. And that was really inspiring. I mean, I think that was the first time that the women group became a leading force, like massive.
Thank you, Sharon. The way women stand up and show up is like this strong, quiet leadership. There's not fighting, but it's going against with, if that makes sense. And there's also a campaign that I really loved in Lebanon, and more recently, about a decade maybe less ago. There is a law in many of the countries, including mine, and it's still there. It's not in Lebanon anymore. That enables rapists to marry their victim. If the rapists marry their victim, it's not a crime anymore. And as you can imagine, there has been many young, this is often young women, almost girls, who committed suicide as a result, and resulting in a big uprising in society against this rule. And in Lebanon, what shifted the balance was a demonstration during the a marathon in Beirut that was very famous, where a group of women organized by Ab'ad, which is a fantastic organization, demonstrated in the streets with wedding dresses covered in blood. And that, it was a very strong way of raising awareness and changing. Also, tell me if I go too long, please.
Please.
Okay. It's basically the colonization together with dogma, these guys behind religious authority, that made the patriarchy spread strong. And to me, that's where the bed of violence lies, because the way men are raised, and not all, but many men are raised in our societies today, is with frustration, sexual frustration, is with repression of their emotions. There is a concept called rujula, which is manhood, kun rajul, be a man, that prevents any outlet of love and emotion in the way we behave in society. And so also an amazing organization called Equimundo has been addressing that, not only in Lebanon and Morocco, but in many countries in the world, especially in the global south, where they work with young boys in school. They develop a whole curriculum, and with therapists and with teachers to help them get in touch with their emotion and teach them that side of being. And in the south of Lebanon, where Hezbollah is very active, it has done wonders. So there are this positive masculinity is also a very strong part of feminism, which often we tend to forget in the white Western feminism. Finally, I'm not going to touch on it, but there has but a little bit still, because there was the Pride very recently, and a big argument, or pinkwashing, as I call it, from Israel, is to basically hide behind the fact that it's a free country, people can be queer free. Look at the Arab countries where people are repressed. I personally identify as a queer person, and I'm very well connected to queer communities across all the region. A lot of that work is also done behind the scenes because people get arrested, etc. And so, and many of them are protesting for peace because they know what it's like to be discriminated against. So yeah, just a note on pinkwashing, but we leave it. And I will finish by to outline what you referred to around the approach of Neto and how innovative it is, that paradigm shift. This is feminist leadership. This is the work that I've been doing most recently in Australia. Feminist not in the sense of women, but in the sense of non-patriarchal. And so it means that the values, behaviors, processes that you described that are we instead of the ego, it's being inclusive, it's being collaborative, it's based on relationship and trust. And this is what we need more than ever today. And gender is a key element of that, not just because of what the UN resolution outlined, which is representation, very important, and conflict, sexual aggression during conflict, which is also very important, but what is at the root cause of that? And that's the values and behaviors behind the leadership. And so, yes, women have demonstrated that because of the way we have been raised, and against all these obstacles, and show solidarity because it's the best way of surviving in the world. And in general, all discriminated populations also have that way of behaving. So yeah.
Thank you so much. And I think you've brought in a lot of perspectives to this conversation, and how we can look at also the remarks that Emad and Sharon have shared already. One thing sticks out to me in particular also is this, while our governments may not always be willing, may not always be the ones to take the initiatives on their own. There are civil society initiatives in all the countries, and bringing them together, whether it be through METO, through other frameworks, feminist frameworks, queer frameworks, is a strategy and something that we can use also to pressure our governments and to show solidarity amongst peoples throughout the Middle Eastern region. So I really appreciate all the remarks up till now. I think we will now be opening up for the Q&A. So I'm not sure if anyone has any questions already. If so, yes, I think we can go right ahead,
It
please.
can also be remarks, suggestions,
Yeah.
ideas.
Really just an open conversation.
And maybe just as a suggestion, if you can say your name before.
But can I say something that Asma forgot to say?
Sure.
Yes, please.
So what Asma forgot to say that is she's coming back to the Middle East. And that's the important part.
Very true.
So for us, it was such a gift to meet and to talk about all these things, and then to realize that she's actually coming back. And then we kind of tied her up until she said yes. But for us, it is so I can't express how important it is for us to have more and more women group inside the Middle East. Not because we don't want men, but we want leadership of women. And we want them to do it with men. But we want this approach, we want to bring them up. I think that one of the main problems is that we, especially in the Middle East, I guess, we're being taught not to think differently, not to raise our hands, not to ask provocative or stupid questions. And it's almost like we're being pushed not to think. Not just women, but women especially. And what Asma is planning for us is an outreach for Arab women, Arab students, to bring more Arab groups on the ground to talk about solutions, to talk about needs, to talk about the SDGs. And we're very happy that now she's part of us.
Me too.
Hashtag.
Yeah, so I think then we can turn to the first question.
So my name is Charlotte. Thanks for being here. It was very interesting to hear all the inputs and everything. So my question goes a bit more in a different direction, like not talking about like free zones of mass destruction, but we have also talked about peace. We've also talked about disarmament. And so at the moment we see this like terrifying war in Gaza. We have seen the 7th of October, like we have seen that the war is like right there, like right in the middle. We're right in the middle of it. And I'm really wondering what's the path towards peace, Like we're just talking about the next hospital that is being bombed, We're talking about how many people have died already. We talk about hate, we talk about different perspectives. And then all of this debate, I'm missing a vision, Or like, I'm missing that we're talking about peace. And yeah, I want to open up this question because I'm sure you've been thinking about this a lot.
Not only have we been thinking about that, we have been planning, and you give us a good segue. Charlotte, thank you for that question. And as we mentioned from the beginning, of course, what is happening in the Middle East, specifically in Gaza and across the region, is very close to our hearts. And of course, we have many dear friends and families that are embroiled in all of these and have paid ultimate costs. And so thank you for giving us the opportunity to tell you about our pivot, which is the expansion of our work. Yes, we still are advancing the prospects for a WMD free zone in the Middle East, because removing these weapons from the equation, of course, would be helpful. But the process itself is building that trust and that dialogue and those negotiations that are necessary, not just on weapons of mass destruction, but also on human security, but also on ultimately how do we achieve a stable, flourishing, and peaceful region. And it will be in the interest of everyone and every citizen in that region. Therefore, since October 7th, Sharon, myself, and our team at Metal went into a deep re-evaluation and thinking about what role can we play amidst this new reality and this carnage in front of our eyes. And this is where we have decided to not only plan for what will be an option for us to look at, but we are using the track record on weapons of mass destruction free zone by bringing these diplomats, and then we're going back to the issue of now peace and security, which then includes obviously what's happening in Gaza, and saying that again, once again, as Sharon has said over and over, there needs to be a regional solution to a conflict that at the moment seems to be between Israel and Palestinians, but it's not. What are the alliances that are nourishing this war? What are the geopolitical realities that are prolonging this war? What is the means through which these negotiations have not bear fruit into cessation of violence, to return of refugees, to the aid that needs to go in, the reconstruction, and ultimately a grand negotiation on how can we actually move forward after so many thousands have been killed and butchered. It is in great importance of how do we imagine a future for the region that has to not only mourn their own, but also a region that has multiple theaters of war that are costing tens and hundreds of thousands of people. Yemen has caused 500,000 deaths. This is the largest man-made catastrophe in the region. Gaza is bleeding and is being flattened. Sudan is in a dire internal chaos that is costing more than 1 million dead. I mean, we are talking about a region that is bleeding. And if we,
South of Israel.
I mean,
People can't live there, and those that are under constant missiles.
so
Syria still.
Syria still, Lebanon is bankrupt. I mean, we have problems. So at this moment, what we have seen is, okay, all eyes are on Gaza. This needs to end. There is a central piece of the puzzle that has to be resolved. We went back and looked and scanned and mapped what are possible pathways forward. And then again, I'm going back to what Sharon mentioned earlier in her remarks, the Arab Peace Initiative of 2002. Now, why is that important? It's one page, but the Arab League, which includes the 22 Arab countries, agreed that if the Palestinians and Israelis reach an agreement on key issues, the status of Jerusalem as a capital for a viable Palestinian state and Israel, a just solution to the return of refugees, issue of security.
Jerusalem.
Jerusalem, I already mentioned.
So 67 Jerusalem.
And then the borders of 1967. Okay? If that happens, all Arab countries will recognize and normalize relationship with Israel that will then lead to security. Okay? Israel never rejected it, didn't agree to it, didn't reject it. The Arabs continue doing, preaching it, but not doing anything about it. We have taken this thing now, and we are going to upgrade it to 2024. We're going to bring in a lot of the processes necessary through track 1.5 diplomacy, roundtables, expert meetings, civil society engagement, identifying how can we take a deal that was supposedly already on table and then present it as another solvable, possible solution, even in the midst of this conflict. And say that, listen, there will be a time, it's not an if, it's a when that the Israeli Defense Force will run out of targets, where Gaza will be flattened to an extent that there is nothing else to kill or nothing else to destroy. There will be an uproar inside Israel that already has begun in terms of we want our hostages back, we want our families back. This combination of international pressures and all of these other factors combined together accumulate to the point that it's not about if, it's a when this conflict ends. What the hell are we going to do the day after? And that's what we're working on. Because we have to be ready for the day after. Because when the day after comes, and if we are not ready with a solution that gives an alternative track and vision for the future, for the people of this region, then it will be hijacked like it always is by those forces that are extreme, but have the microphone, that have the power, that want to maintain their economic interests, their political survival, and we go back into that cycle. That is why it is immediate, that's why it's so important, that is why Metal, our whole operation now, has shifted by saying 20% goes to maintaining what is happening in the weapons of mass destruction free zone domain, and we are pivoting to human security and a regional solution to the conflicts that are raging on in the region. And give us a little bit more time, but we're in it and we're working on it. And that's why we're here to also say, we need all hands on deck. We need your support. We need your help. There are solutions. You know, Asma has given you a few examples. Sharon has done the same. We know what to do. We got way out of this, and we can achieve it by really coming together and saying, if you want this carnage to end, then drop your hat into this domain and help us. So we are not.
I'll just say something very short about it. I think you asked what the vision, I think you understand that there's a vision, right? But you asked also about the path. And about the path goes through two solutions, because I guess that you're here to talk about Gaza and Israel and not about the whole of the Middle East, right? I mean, most people. What we talk about, what not you specifically, because what most people are hearing is about what's going on in Gaza. And what most people don't want to do is to talk to the Israelis now. And the path, the only path is, if you're happy with the unilateral decision, okay, let's just recognize Gaza, let's just, then what is your end? Where do you decide that you want? What is the, I mean, it's not enough just to take the path. You need to know when you got to your destination. So if there is any other solution than agreement, I didn't hear about it, unless it's Sinwar from Hamas solution, which is to slaughter Israel from the river to the sea. Palestine will be free. Now we know how it looks like. I don't like this vision. So if it's not that vision, or the opposite vision of Israel killing all the Palestinians, really doing the genocide and not what is done now, which is horrible enough, then what is the solution? Where's the end solution? Now, people might fight over one state or two states. I think it's irrelevant. What's relevant is that the Israelis and the Palestinians would want to have an agreement. I personally believe in a two-state solution because I'm afraid that one-state solution will become an apartheid state. Don't want to see that happen. I also think that two societies entangled in so much hate and pain needs to breathe a little bit separately, learn to see each other as, and maybe in 20 years we can have a confederation or one state. Maybe we won't need it because by then we will have the Middle East Union. So the path to peace is what you vision at the end, and then what are you willing to do to get it? If we are all willing or understanding that if we want Israel to stop the occupation, we actually need to convince Israel that stopping the occupation is good for Israel, then we might win. If we're not willing to do that, then probably we don't believe in a solution. For me, that's the path. The ability to talk to even those who you don't like right now in order to achieve what you want to achieve. It won't happen if Israel wouldn't want it to happen. What can we do? Actually, the Arab Peace Initiative is something that is very easy to sell to Israelis. Very easy, because it's a good solution, because it's the only solution that brings security and strive and the ability to take a car and go to Europe, right? I mean, right now, I know not like Gaza, but we're also kind of trapped within our borders. And we don't even know what our borders are. So it's not really good for us, right? The occupation. Talk to the Israelis, that's the path, I think. But believe that it's possible.
See, we have a question here. I also have a question. Is yours related to what has just been said or? Okay, maybe if you don't mind, I'll just quickly ask one follow-up question for anyone who would be interested in answering. And I'm wondering, with the regional level, also, I think there would need to be some sort of reconciliation among peoples as well. And I'm wondering how that would factor in. If we, as you were saying, talking to people that you hate is not necessarily an easy task. How is it possible to bring people closer to being able to speak with each other and finding understanding within the societies throughout the region, not just Israel Palestine, but that as maybe one example.
I just wanted to say one thing on that question. The weird families that we have heard a lot about within Israel that has Palestinians and Israelis who've lost family members in wars or conflict. Unfortunately, their numbers have grown since October 7th, but their activities haven't stopped. They're under a lot of pressure because they're seen as traitors inside. We're dealing with the Palestinians are dealing with Israelis. But the fact that these groups exist and these civil society engagements are still happening is an important sign that there is hope. We're just in the barrage of news and algorithms that tailor messages to each one of us. We're in this flood. We do not see these examples popping out. We just see hate on one side to the other and the other side to the other. And this polarization removes the possibility for us to identify these incredibly important gems that are functioning in the midst of a huge and difficult conditions, but they're still existing.
I also want to say that it's something that outsiders find it hard to believe. But I mean, look at how Ahmad and I connected yesterday, right? How Asma and I connected the minute we met, even before we knew that we want to work together. Yesterday, there were two Palestinians that came to hear us and living now in Berlin, and we immediately connected. There are several reasons for that. First and all, we're all Middle Easterns. We have the same food, we have the same weather, we know each other leaders and problems. We have the wars over hummus and falafel. I mean, coming from the state with a superior. So, and it's not just that. So when I talk to a Palestinian, maybe he knows I'm Israeli. And that on one hand, I might be supporting this government or not, but he also knows, or she also knows, that I am in the same danger almost as she is if there's escalation. So we understand each other's suffering, we know each other's suffering, and we know the systems around us. So while we are enemies, we also know each other in a way that outsiders won't get. And I think that this is something to build on. We all share the same destiny, and we're all going to face the same climate change in a region that is going to suffer in the same way. So we have the same future threats. And half of Israel are Arabs. I'm not talking about the 20% of the population that are Muslims and Christians Arabs. I'm talking about the Jewish Arabs. And people keep forgetting that. When I went to Morocco, the food was familiar to me because Israel is full with Moroccan Jews. I am Yemeni. I'm half Yemeni. That's why I have such a nice color. Because I am half Arab, right? What do you think that I grew on with food? What kind of schooling? I only know Arabic schooling words in Yemeni for my grandmother, right? Ya Krim Abuk. Okay, so there is so much in common, and I'm saying it because I know it's so hard to look at all the atrocities and all the pain and forget it. But I hate, we talked about today, we are one, we're not one, but we're familiars. And it's strong.
And I find that the story of your story, the two of you, is quite an inspiring one. And that's, if you want to share it a little bit, but that's again, that like ability to listen to each other, the ability to trust, the ability to not judge, the ability to sit with the discomfort because you know that you're addressing situations that are difficult, that triggers trauma for everyone around the room. So how can you go beyond that? Actually look at the human, not the, not the outside armor. And I don't know if you want to share a little bit about your story.
My first time meeting Sharon, we did not click. I didn't even like her. I thought she was my enemy at the United Nations. That's important because it's not always like, you meet a fellow Middle Easterner and it's all Habibi, Habibti, Yalla. No. When I met Sharon, I was on a mission to discredit and dismantle whatever she's going to say in an audience about anything about nuclear. Well, Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons. Our scientists are getting assassinated. Our program is getting sabotaged. And this Israeli is walking into the UN talking about nuclear things. She must have the chutzpah to come and do this. So no, it's not always like that. But we were able to converse. We were able to finally click together. And where we clicked on was actually our humanity. It was actually emotion. It was the events that, in Sharon's life that had been very difficult that I somehow had affinity or empathy for. And that changed everything. I'm saying that because it doesn't take that much longer for any two or group of humans to realize, even if Middle Eastern or not, that ultimately you're having the similar fears, similar aspirations, goals and dreams. And so if that's the case, we're not all one, but we're all part of a spectrum between 0 and 1. So it's important to keep that in mind.
Thank you all so much. So I know we have a question over here. There's also one online. I'll take your question first. And we still have almost an hour here, so we'll try to make sure to get to every question. We'll start here, go online quick, and then come back to you. Thank you.
Thanks. My question, in a sense, was very similar than.
Can you please introduce yourself?
Sorry, I'm Tamás. I'm from Hungary, living nomadic, partly based in Berlin. My question was very similar to yours, but then a little bit building on it. Sharon, you mentioned that in order to find solutions, all the actors need to step out of the stories that they've been telling to themselves, and they need to craft a new story. Now, this beautiful picture that you painted of how humans connect, this is my passion in my work. My challenge is that how do we bring this from this level up to the decision-making levels? Like, how do we get politicians to start going beyond the stories and start creating the space for writing the new stories? And this is where I personally get discouraged, not just with this conflict, but with climate change, with mental health issues, and we can start listing them. And by the way, I'm not expecting a solution because
we have a story of the possibilities.
So I'll give two examples. One is what we've done with the draft treaty, which was to really boldly just take it to the UN. Not because the UN is that important, and no big decisions usually taking place there. But it's like if you want to be effective, imagine you go to one room with a representation of the whole world. And if you say something there, some of them have to write reports back home. And if you meet with diplomats, they have to write about the meeting and send it back home. So that's how you take what you know and how the system works to use it against the system. They won't make any decisions there. But if you go to a meeting that they lead or whatever, and you get your message through and it goes back to their ministries, then you have a bit of a follow-up to do, or at least you know that you penetrated the government. This is one thing. The second thing was to actually talk to them about the responsibility. If you already know this is a solution, but tangible, something that they can bite on. Now, I'm not saying that it can work with climate change, but I think on this issue, it showed that it's doable. The next thing, the next thing about it was to let them be part of the process in a safe, secure way. So whatever that came out from us afterwards, they felt they were part of the decision making. So, and that's the story Imad wanted me to tell. We invited stakeholders from around the Middle East to Zurich. We got some funds, it was amazing. And we could bring them for 3.5 days. And we knew that these are the exactly same stakeholders that always say that it's impossible, and that in many thousands of panels, they never crossed the line. So for many years, there are panels on the WMD free zone, only that they start from 1974, some go from the beginning of the Israeli state, and they stop it, and here is where we are. So if they're so addicted, and the only place that they feel comfortable is to talk about the obstacles, let's surprise them. The first day, when everybody is still sitting uncomfortably in their chairs, we put a whiteboard and with papers like there, and we said, okay, first session, 1.5 hours just about the obstacles. Yeah, and talk about what you feel comfortable with. And they, the whole usual shebang was there. No trust, Israel is this, Egypt is this, they didn't sign this, they didn't sign that, like basically like kindergarten talk, which is, if you were willing to take a step back and strip from stories, that's how states behave as kindergartens. If you can predict how kindergarten act at kindergarten when something happened, you can probably predict how states will react to each other. The end of the first session, they feel good, not just because they got all the obstacles out, but because we promised them that the last half day on the 4th day will be just about the obstacles again. Don't worry, we'll go back to what you feel comfortable talking about. So by that, we kind of disarmed them. The second step was to give them a draft treaty that is not complete. It's not good enough. We actually intentionally kept as remarks at the bottom, like remarks and EK, I don't agree with this, and we invented some letters, other letters. I think that this should be different, so we're not giving them a complete product. Yes, it's complete, but with lots of problems. And then we asked the remarks on each article, and they started to have a very vivid, because they all wanted to show also their expertise on what can make this Article 1 better and what can make Article 2 better. And Article 3, people didn't follow Article 2 might solve the problem. And we took it all in. From that, we learned what are the real obstacles, things that were hard to decide on that table, not what they said at the first day. After 3 days of them working on making this draft treaty much, much, much better, and we came to the last day, we know that now the next session is obstacles. And one diplomat raises his hand and says, actually, maybe we shouldn't talk about the obstacles. Maybe we should dedicate the next session about the next steps. How can we make it better? How can we protect this process? And everybody say, yeah, we don't want to talk about the obstacles. And for us, it was, I mean, I went out to cry. Came back, I couldn't believe. I mean, we could imagine that's what we wanted, but we couldn't even believe that that's what will happen. And suddenly these diplomats are hugging each other, and people from the academy and think tanks that are usually, and at the end, it ended up in such a good spirit that some of these diplomats are still supporting some of the things that we are doing, making sure that they will become resolutions. Which is why it also makes us, and this is also about human contact, how you are willing to step back and let the diplomats do their work, realize that it's theirs now. Let go, it's theirs. giving them ownership, even if you're the one that's writing it afterwards. It doesn't matter. Let them own it, let them solve problems together. It's amazing what it does to people. And then they could take it back to their ministries. I don't know what happened in that room, but these people shifted. And then they brought their governments along. But I know that if we could have done it with WMD, definitely there's path to do it from almost anything else. We just need to strategize. We just need to strip from the stories of everything that we tell ourselves why it's impossible and the emotions and look at the problem really for what it is, stripping from all the stories, and then you have a clear path. Also, how to bring them to this path once it's clear to you. I hope I am helped.
Any of the other speakers have anything to add?
No, I mean, just just a little bit, I mean, so much. I mean, you gotta realize how crazy this was. That we were in Zurich, in some fancy hotel that was given to us through this and that, it doesn't matter. And who's in the room? These are in their personal capacity, so they don't represent their governments, but these are high-level high-level diplomats from these key countries and experts mixed in with them. We're talking about Israelis, Iranians, Saudis, Bahrainis, Egyptians. Some of them don't even recognize each other as even human because their governments don't even recognize each other as states. So you can imagine the tension on day one. And so like you can feel the heaviness. And then what Sharon described, that at the end, they're hugging each other. I mean, it's mind-blowing. I mean, what we can do in 3.5 days. Imagine if we have 5. You know? And the other part that was very important and key that Sharon did not mention is that on that last session that was supposed to be on obstacles, and this one diplomat said, you know what, let's talk about next steps and how to protect this process. The language started to change in that final session. And they kept talking like, we have to protect our process. Suddenly the language changed. It was like very subtle. It's like, okay, your draft treaty, pointing at us at the beginning, to like our draft treaty. Suddenly they took ownership so fast. And I bet you know why? Because they've been working on this stuff for such a long time. I'm talking about like decades. They have built their whole diplomatic careers over like making this WMD free zone a reality. And then to see actually something tangible and solution oriented, it gave them like a reboot, a bolt of energy. Because they do want to actually go back to the ministry. Look, oh yes, I just come back and we have a plan. It is possible. And then we needed one government to bite. One government to bite. There we got a few, but one took it to the next level because they are respected within their own ministries, their own governments, they have legitimacy, they have years of diplomacy, and blah, blah, blah. They whispered that to the other decision makers. Suddenly, before we know it, this was in 2016?
Beginning of 2017.
Beginning of 2017, by October 2018, there was a resolution at the UN General Assembly. Now, why is that key? Because that's different to the NPT. NPT has, remember, Israel is not part of it. The UN General Assembly is every state recognized nation on the planet is represented at the UN. A resolution getting passed, recognized state, by the way, recognized state. For that to be passed, then in the long term, it obligates at some point Israel. Israel can no longer say, I am not a party to the UN. You are a party to the UN. You are a member state of the UN. And this resolution is for all the nations. And therefore, for the first time, we have a process that is outside of another forum the NPT, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, that already excluded Israel by its own virtue. And in this case, it houses it in the UN itself, that opens up every year this annual conference by the Secretary General himself and his head of disarmament. So we're talking about high level that are dealing with this issue. So yes, there are some great breakthroughs, bringing these characters together and then seeing it actually being realized. Gives us also hope, gives us also an energy and a box to continue in this madness of seemingly impossibles, but they are possible.
Thank you. We'll turn quickly to two questions that we have online, and I'm just going to ask them both, and that way you can all answer them as you see, with the two questions. So the first one comes from Daniel, and Daniel says, you mentioned that now the talks at the annual meetings are trying to make an agreement that considers Israel's demands. Does this lead to a double-edged sword or a double-edged problem with negotiating with other countries in the region like Iran, more considering the current conflict? The second question, coming from Sandra, is saying, thank you for your thought-provoking insights. I wonder if you could elaborate more on the role of culture in addressing the obstacles for finding sustainable paths towards peace in the region. Let me know if you need me to repeat anything, sorry.
Just the last.
Could you elaborate more on the role of culture in addressing the obstacles for finding sustainable paths towards peace in the region?
So, can I start? So taking Israel's into consideration by the states in the room is actually a decision by the states in the room, including Iran. I mean, every decision that they take is by consensus. Do they not have meetings that end up at 3 a.m.? Because they want to reach consensus? Yes. Do we know exactly what they're fighting on? Not really. But do they work on something that they believe that might succeed? Yes. And in order for it to succeed, it needs to be not a treaty that calls on Israel to do things, because that won't work, but a treaty that shows that there can be a regional operation of checking each other. I forgot the name. Verifications. I can't believe it. Verifications, and the mechanism of compliance by the states in the region with the international organizations. So the minute that they're talking about regional approach to that, that's by itself what might allow Israel in, because it means that all the states can decide what are the verifications, what are the level of visiting each other, concerning inspections and peer reviews they are willing to do. So if they want Israel to join this regional apparatus, it's actually in their interest to write it in a way that it's not giving up on anything. It's not saying, Israel can stick to its nuclear weapons, marry its chemical and biological arsenals, and we will be fine with it. It's actually calling on Israel to do something that is very hard for any state that possesses these weapons, right? And the minute that that is recognized, that minute makes it tangible, makes it like something that might work. About the culture, I think that culture is super important, because where do we learn from most? Not from movies and Netflix. Now, if none of the culture, if our culture and in the movies praise war, but doesn't show anything of the real suffering. Remember the power of the movie The Day After? There were two of them, right? One on climate change and one on nuclear bombs. The first movie that showed the real suffering the day after the bomb and the month after the bomb was world-changing. That's why the US and the USSR then went from 90,000 bombs to about 20,000 then. That started agreements. Imagine that we can use culture, images that shows on one hand what might happen to the Middle East if we continue like we continue. But more importantly, if we can actually show the image of the new Middle Eastern desert city, because we are all going to get more desert now, right? Much more desert. Already people are running away to cities. So urbanization is a big problem. Imagine that we can show the picture of the future city, community-based, green, solar paneled city of the Middle East. Imagine that we can show Middle East pride, not pride just for LGBT, but the pride of being Middle Eastern. Usually people look down at Middle Eastern, and of course we internalize it, right? You know that how horrible it is when you realize that brown girls think that the life of a blonde girl worth more. That even brown kids know that feel that it's more important when there's somebody missing that is white than someone that's missing that is brown. Even brown kids would think that it's more tragic that the white girl was kidnapped. I mean, there are researchers that show it. So imagine if culture gives Middle East pride, gives Middle East vision, how it can look like. Culture can go a long way. And funny enough, I mean, one of the events that we did yesterday was mainly about that, how to bring people that are entirely not from our field to support this work. People that do commercials, people that do art, people that do music. How can they, because they want to do something, they look at the pictures but they feel that they're not, but of course they have a role, important role, like everybody.
I would love to add something on culture, building on what you said, because what you highlighting is the power of imagination. And as a mirror of that, there's also the power of remembering, because our region is a region of cultures living in harmony and trading and sharing with each other. And the story of separation is a European story that was translated or was transposed to our region. And so how can we imagine and remember that this way of living together and being together and sharing what we have in common, and the new and also like culture is not static, like culture is in constant movement, it's dynamic. So you were talking about the food. So there's a big Jewish community, has always been a big Jewish community in Morocco, always lived in harmony. Last week, my mother was not last week, but last month when I was in Morocco, she went to a celebration, she danced at the Toledano, Jewish family friends of ours in Rabat. Same music, same food, different celebrations. As I mentioned yesterday that I have Palestinians and Israeli friends and from the diaspora, and the richness that comes from the exchange is what we need to remember. Like, we have all the skills, and when you talk about the city of the future, we're talking about people from all the region coming to create the city of the future, not a localized and frozen city.
And Imad usually reminds us that the Middle East is one of the youngest regions in the world.
Youngest.
Full with young people.
Demographically.
Sorry, demographically. So here also.
What about our history?
Not yours, of course. Let's all
I should actually bring Iran a little bit into this. I mean,
let's all agree that Iran is where humanization.
Shut up. Actually, this is quite important. This is quite important. Because I'm also coming in as the Iran. And Iran is quite unique in the region. It's unique in three primary ways for our conversation. Number one, it was never colonized. There was no British or French or Russian complete colonization of Iran. And that changed a lot of things about how Iran sees itself and how Iranians see themselves. Number two, Iran has a vast and long history that dates back to millennia, and you can check up on your history lessons. It is, where, our Cyrus the Great, 2,438 years ago, by the way, saved your people, the Jews, in Babylon by having the first scrolls of human rights. I mean, the French talk about their revolution and their human rights, but the original human rights was actually written on a scroll by Cyrus the Great that gave protection by the king to all the communities of different beliefs and traditions. That's important. The tolerance of the other as a ruler of millennia ago. So don't worry, we know how to coexist and have really good ideas and laws and so forth. That's number two, long history, no colonization. And number three is also we are technically not Arabs, we are Persians and Baluchis and Azeris and Lugro Pashtuns, and we have Kurds and everybody else. That also distincts us from the rest of the region, which identifies not necessarily in like the Maghreb or elsewhere, but primarily as an Arab sort of domination through language, culture. Even when Islam came to Iran, we even wanted to be even more special. We lost. The Islamic invasion of Iran brought Islam, but then we are Shia. We are the denomination of the Shia and not the Sunni. This is the difference between Protestants and Catholics, okay? Smaller by number, but damn it, we are quite loud in key areas. In Yemen, we have Shia. In Bahrain, we have Shia. In Lebanon, we have Shia. In Iraq, we have Shia. And then this whole crescent of the Shia, the spread of Iranian influence through religion, through the sect of Shia. So these are fundamentally different sort of viewpoints. What that means is that Iranians still are very proud. Whereas when you speak to a lot of Arabs, they are feeling like, they've lost their, for lack of better words, they've lost not only their pride, but they've been defeated so much. They've been defeated by colonization, by erasure of their sort of identities, by what is happening to Palestinians, the catastrophe for the Arab world, for the wars that they fought against this little new sort of state that was imposed from, let's say, Western whatever imposition. Suddenly they can't take it out. Armies of Syria and Egypt, the grand armies couldn't take out Israel. So like there's a lot of feeling of inferiority in the Arab world in comparison with the rest of the world, specifically Europe, and even, to be honest with you, with the Iranians. Because we had a revolution, we kicked out the Shah, we kicked out the American influence, and we're paying for it until today. I'm not saying that the revolution was necessarily manifested in the right way, but what we did that no other country in the region has done, or by very few in the world, to kick out a superpower that was saw Iran as a client state. That's pretty powerful. Yeah, we are under sanctions. We have a horrible dictatorial, autocratic leaderships that is suppressing our population. Even then, our women are at the forefront of the societal change that is taking place in Iran, from the freedom, life, and woman movement that erupted in Iran. We may not hear about it now, but its impact is so permanently scratched into the memories and history of our country, to the point that like our women in Iran today have realized that they can, through their collective action, go against Islamic Republic apparatus and be able to now today, with a single act of removing the hijab, which has got nothing to do with religion, by the way, in this context. It's got to do with what it's their experience of what that meant, are able to now reach a point where the Iranian authorities cannot control on this one pillar of the revolution that required women and men to be modest in their clothing. I'm not saying that just to undermine our Israeli friends and our, by the way, Israelis, they really think they're superior to, and our Arab colleagues. But it's a huge distinction because in a lot of these conversations, when it comes to peace and security, on Gaza too, you will hear the role of Iran, the omnipresence role of Iran in everything. But you don't hear why are they not included in discussions to resolve these issues. And it comes from the American invasion in Iraq and Afghanistan that actually removed the two enemies of Iran, Saddam Hussein and the Taliban. And even then, we were thankful for the Americans to get rid of these characters. But then to stabilize it, Iran was the one that actually worked with the Americans to stabilize Afghanistan and Iraq until the Americans said, you know what, get out. And the Iranians said, oh, this is how you pay us back? Yalla, we're going to make this hell for you. I'm saying this because we have already all the components that can either take the region towards stability or towards catastrophe. The same Iran that can stabilize Afghanistan because they have 30 years of alliances with, inside groups inside Afghanistan and Iraq, are able to, at the same time, when they are threatened by, Bush then for an invasion of Iran, to turn the heat up at will. That's an important power and influence that, if corrected or directed in a different approach, can actually resolve a lot of the issues that we have, including what's happening in Gaza.
Thank you, Imad. We are, the time is flying by here. We have about 15 minutes left for today. I know, yes, we have a question back here. Were there other questions as well, or?
It's very short.
Okay, please. No, maybe just to say also, if people think of questions later, I think we'll have a brief reception after this. So for those that are in the room with us, there might be some opportunities still to engage if our speakers aren't too tired. I know 2 hours of speaking is quite a lot here. So, but maybe in a more calm way. But yes, please go ahead.
My name is Akira. I work here in our Germany. Thank you so much. It was an absolutely great panel. And I have a very practical question regarding, I met Sharon and Imad last year during NPT PrepCon in Vienna, and you delivered such a great suicide statement back then. And I just wanted to know your plans for this NPT PrepCon, considering how, since what was that, at the beginning of August, the political tensions have changed. So what are your plans for this year?
Great question. You didn't say
I wanted to go back to the nuclear.
Bring us back. This got really crazy.
So this year at the NPT, Non-Proliferation Treaty, we are going to deliver a statement again. We are not sure yet who is going to deliver it, but last time, us reading it together and in a way that they cannot separate it, meaning not half Imad, half me, but paragraph, made our governments not happy with us. So we probably do it again.
Don't remind them.
I don't think too many governments will.
If we can do it with somebody else in Arab, because Asma cannot make it, we might do it with another Palestinian colleague of ours, also new to Meto, but veteran of. Actually, we used to be on the same radio, Palestinian Israeli radio, many years ago, so this is definitely something that's going to happen. We are going to touch on current events, but we also going for our next step in our project, which is to focus what are the next steps. We're going to call on all nuclear armed states to call on a timeline for Article 6. Article 6 is the article that they all sign on that says that they will get rid of the nuclear weapons. They just didn't agree on the timeline. And that's happening since 1967. So
things move really slowly. But we're speeding them up.
Now, one of the reasons is because actually, I think that I can say on our behalf that we never thought that it's okay to work on the Middle East. I mean, nuclear weapons are a huge threat. The Middle East is not real, right? It's the concept by the West. And okay, you disarm the Middle East, so what? And how do you want to disarm the Middle East when you have India, Pakistan, North Korea, Russia, US, England, France, and China, still one stupid decision, and we're all gone. In the good case. Best case scenario, we're not all gone, just those who survive will suffer very much for a very long time. And God forbid what kind of kids they will bear. So we are on this NPT, we plan to take these two ahead with the peace initiative. As we said, we have a tangible peace plan that has several, and it's not written yet. It's in bits and pieces because it's not ours to write. And if we come with the ready one, but we will come with a draft. And our draft is going to have several things in it. First, a very simple 1 to 2 pager, just like the Arab Peace Initiative was. But this time we will mention all the problems in the Middle East and the regional solution for them. The most important part is what will happen afterwards and what we will invite people in the room, because I know that they'll come because we're there and they want us to talk about the Middle East. And then we're going to push WMD free zone doesn't go without peace. And for peace, what you need is a vision. Now we have the vision, but we need them to also become part of the vision. And that's why we're using the SDGs and other things. So how do you sell peace and how do you get ready for peace? Imagine that you do roundtables with people that are expertise are on architecture, people that are specialists on food security, on climate change, on water security, on health, education, and you ask them to write one annex for this peace treaty. And this annex should be what all the states as if agreed already to achieve in 5 years if they all work together. So imagine what can be achieved on food security regionally, put it there and make it as part of the goal of the UN or the states in the region. And we hope to have a sign event this time. We might have one with IPB. And I mean, we already have one on Monday, on the first day. But we're also going to have another one just to focus on the peace part. And I hope that this will bring at least one government to want to bring it up again in October at the and then and the reason is not because it's important that the UN makes decision, but once we have a decision by the UN, then there's something to campaign about. Now it's not us asking people to stop fighting for something that they can't have, but actually to fight for something tangible, and the UN said so. You know, if people look at it, it's a symbol, you need to use it. But I want to say something that some of you won't like to hear. I think that all eyes on Gaza is, I'll speak in French, bullshit. I think that nobody cares about the Palestinians. That's what I think, not really. I think that the Israelis don't care about the Palestinians because they're the enemy and they're afraid of them and think that all Palestinians want to, well, not all Israelis, okay? I mean, we do have big groups that want peace, that fight for peace, and to be honest, are by far more courageous than anyone that fights for Palestinian rights outside of Israel. I mean, to fight for Palestinian rights in Israel demands courage and the ability to get injured a lot. But outside of these groups, and outside the Palestinians that are actually affected by that, which exclude other Palestinians too, by the way. The Palestinians in Ramallah don't care as much as others. I mean, you have to understand that Palestinians are not a poster. And the reason I'm saying it is because when I see hundreds of thousands of students around the world marching for Palestine and all eyes on Gaza, but are not willing to talk to Israelis or to look at solutions, I think that they are using the Palestinians in a way to feel good, to do something meaningful. Suddenly they feel like they're freedom fighters, and they are not even recognized that they're calling from the river to the sea. They're actually calling for genocide while being peace organizations. The Arab states, they don't give a shit about the Palestinians. How do we know? Some of them went and do agreements with Israel, even though they already promised that there will be no recognition and no normalization as long as the occupation continued, and then they went ahead and did exactly this. Europe, same. Hamas killed more Palestinians than killed Israelis. So still some people can't even differentiate between Hamas and other forces in Palestine. And this narrow way of looking at Palestinians is so exploitive in a way. And I mean, you have Lebanon, you have Jordan, you have, I forgot the third state that is hosting, calling the hosting states of the refugees, without giving them citizenship for third generation, without giving them passports, the right to move. Now, they are the brothers, right? So all eyes on Gaza, but not on a solution. And then we have to ask ourselves, what is the story that we're telling us that makes us feel so passionate about people we never met, people we don't know? Well, there's so many other atrocities in the world that we just don't give a damn about. Because not far from Gaza, 500,000 people, civilians dead in Yemen. Okay. Congo, okay. Eritrea, fine. Change the channel, let's watch Netflix. Palestine, let's go march. But march where? To what solution? Why are we marching? And how is it that since I remember myself, there are so many people marching for Palestine without even knowing where it is? Seriously. So the reason I'm saying it is because it's about time that we do care about the people in the Middle East. Look at the solutions. There are solutions. Understand our power. Understand our responsibility. When people come to me now and say, we don't want to do anything, we want a ceasefire. We're civil society, we want a ceasefire. Let me ask you, are not all the governments calling on Israel to ceasefire? Do we have more power than governments? That we're repeating what governments are saying? No, we need to lead the governments. So if all the governments calling on ceasefire don't succeed, should we call for ceasefire or should we call for the next step? We lost this war. Us, the Palestinians, Hamas already won. Let's recognize that. The Palestinians and Israelis lost this war, Hamas won this war, that's it. What is the next step? How can we make sure that this doesn't happen? How can we not just talk about Gaza, but ask people from Gaza what the day after looks for them? Maybe they have some answers. I mean, it almost doesn't happen. Somebody talks above the Palestinian heads. And this brings to, again, to we need to remove the stories that allow this stupidity, this irresponsibility. What is it that we can do? Then it's our responsibility to do it. If we can't do, what is it that we can? And that's what my final statement to long run.
I just want to say, I agree with what Shannon says, but these protests are important. I don't necessarily see no value in these protests. I think that the outrage on what is happening in Gaza is important to continue to bring pressure from every corner possible. And if you feel like at the moment that's the one action you can take to go to the streets, do that. However, what I will then add on to what Sharon is saying is that that's actually a good place. A dear beloved of mine I asked him, like, why do you go to these protests? He's like, actually, it's a good place to find people that are really interested on this topic and they want to do something. So it's actually a very good place for networking. So go there in the protest, find your plan, find your community, build connections, build a movement. It starts maybe with you going into the streets because that's the only thing you think you can do. But actually, when you then come together, we realize that, wait a minute, we can do much more effective, non-violent direct action, okay? That also includes a form of protest, not a protest in the street marching, but it could actually be very much strategic. Like, how do we get a lot of, how do we then shift to solution and then showcase the solution in the most innovative way, the most direct way to get attention from whoever. In the awareness that has been created, how do we take this energy that is feeling hopeless as they continue to see this carnage and then direct it towards something that are full of solutions? And this is what we're seeing. Another important point. In addition to protesting in the streets and so forth, we actually need much more, accountants actually to be part of this movement. We need more those that are, that are inside the system, inside weapons producing companies, financial analysts or hedge fund managers. We need more of them actually. Can you believe that I'm saying this? We need more hedge fund managers for Palestine, because then we can identify where is the capital going that is nourishing this carnage, not just in Gaza, but there's a real financial, economic interest to maintain these forever wars. And this military-industrial complex that we keep hearing is not an abstract. It's your Boeings that are making your planes that take you from A to B, but are also creating the F-35s that are also, dropping bombs. They actually, by the way, also design weapons and weapon systems. I mean, this is not rocket science. We can map out this privatization of the means of war, identify these characters, identify these companies, and actually protest in front of the Boeing headquarters. Deface that in front of that building. And this is just one. I mean, we can go through like hundreds of different direct, non-violent action that we can learn from our brothers and sisters and those between and beyond that have worked on advancing social justice, racial justice. LGBTQ community is an important one to see how they evolve through that process. The climate conversations. These are movements for change that carry either a legal dimension or a political dimension or a societal dimension. So don't necessarily see it as worthless that these protests are happening. They are putting pressure. But imagine if we can take this collective, enormous new awareness and concern and bring it towards, man, how many do we need to bring down Boeing from stopping what they're doing? You can shame them. You can then hit them hard with their stock prices by making sure that your pension funds in your countries or your hedge fund managers or whoever it is does not invest in these companies. You can actually make it a big hoo-ha on this thing. So we can talk about other strategies while having peanuts outside.
I have the closing words then. No pressure. I really like that we finish on this topic because it's also an illustration of what's going on and how we have conversations about it. Like, there are different perspectives, but there is an agreement and a solution to move forward. I agree with a lot of what Sharon said and a lot of what you said as well. And it reminded me of a conversation with a friend of mine, Palestinian friend last week, who was saying, well, the protest and the media outlook on it and the reactions are not changing much for us on the ground. But the difference is that there is a global awareness. Now people know what we've been living through decades and decades, like a situation that's not new to us, but the world has opened their eyes to it. And now it's like, how do we direct that energy, as you said? So it's not just putting pressure, but also creating hope for a new path. And this is what you're like, oh, we're creating with Meto and this process, and redirecting this energy, because that uprising is also a call for connection that people need and people want. So how do we harness that and foster that and remind that it's an inspiration for all movements of liberation across the world? Because as you said, all the discriminations and all systemic oppression are connected to each other. So yes, we can criticize and have a sincere outlook on it, and we can also look at the other ways that it can be beneficial. That's my fun world.
That's amazing, thank you. Just to close the event today, I realized I didn't say anything for maybe those who aren't as familiar with IPB and the work that we do.
Run away. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Sean.
Don't worry about
And
that.
an amazing team, by the way, that are also right there.
But the International Peace Bureau, we're one of the world's oldest and largest international networks of peace and peace-related organizations. We were founded in 1891, won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1910, way before so many wars and events. But we've been around a while, and centrally, our goal is to coordinate and facilitate the exchange of resources, tools, and ideas between different activists, different organizations, to learn from one another, to grow together, and to strategize for practical solutions together. We have groups that are protesting in front of Boeing and Airbus and all of these other large arms manufacturers that are part of our network. We also have groups doing on-the-ground peace-building work in the Congo, in Sudan. And it is important to note, as our speakers have said here, all of these issues are interlinked. Climate change and militarism are strongly interlinked. Patriarchal societies and militarism are so strongly linked, and so on and so on. So it is very important that we have these connections, these conversations, that we learn from one another, and where we have disagreements, we also voice those disagreements in a peaceful way, learn from one another, and find the areas where we can have the most impact. And different organizations have different impacts, and that's okay too. But if you'd like to learn more about IPB and the work we're doing, you can visit www.ipb.org. I think we also have some pamphlets outside for those who are here in person. I wanted to thank one more time also the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung, or Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, for their support for our event today. The Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, for those who are not familiar with this, is an international foundation, but also a German foundation. It's one of 6 major political foundations here in Germany, with close ties to Die Linke, the party. And they promote a critical analysis of society and foster networks of emancipatory political, social, and cultural initiatives in Germany, as well as internationally, participating in cooperative development projects and advocating for a dialogue between the Global North and Global South, conducted on equal footing. You can find out more about Rosa Luxemburg at rosalux, that's ROSALUX.de. And of course, could not forget the Middle East Trade Organization, METO. You can visit their website at wmd-free.me. And of course, also let us know if you need links or anything else for more information. A huge thank you to our speakers today for the inspiring talk, for the deep talk on a variety of subjects. I'm sure we could sit here for another 2 hours if we weren't all so tired, but I appreciate after 2 very long days of work that you come and speak, and that we've had so many great people here in attendance as well. Thank you to everyone who's come in person or online for the event today. We appreciate you, and a big round of applause for our speakers here.